As the Reich crumbled, the women who had shared the lives and ideals of the Nazi leaders faced their downfall with an uncertain fate. Ilse Hess, wife of Rudolf Hess, experienced a destiny marked by separation and solitude following her husband's decisions. After the Nuremberg trials, Rudolf Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment and transferred to Spandau prison, where he remained until his death in 1987. For Ilse Hess, this meant a definitive separation, forcing her to face life without her husband while bearing the weight of his absence. In an attempt to vindicate his memory, Ilse wrote the book Rudolf Hess, Ich spreche die Wahrheit, where she defended her husband's innocence, portraying him as a misunderstood idealist. On the other hand, Margarete Himmler, wife of the Reichsführer SS, embodied the ideology of the regime in her daily life. With a somber demeanor and firm manners, Margarete firmly believed in the ideal of racial superiority, and even went so far as to declare, "We have built something that the world will never forget." Margarete Himmler, the shadow of the Reichsführer. In 1927, Heinrich Himmler embarked on a train journey from Munich to Berchtesgaden, near the Austrian border. During this trip, he met Margarete Sigroth Boden, a divorced nurse who would later become the mother of his daughter Gudrun. Margarete, known as Marga, perfectly embodied the Aryan woman stereotype: tall, blonde, blue-eyed, and Protestant. In contrast, Himmler was far from the Aryan ideal he promoted. At 27 years old, he was thin, nearsighted, and had a weak chin. His frail health prevented him from engaging in sports or enjoying abundant meals, which fueled his insecurity about his physical appearance. This personal dissatisfaction led him to seek refuge in strict discipline and the use of uniforms, symbols that gave him a sense of authority and control. A relationship rooted in ideology. In his youth, Himmler had little experience with women and publicly defended sexual abstinence as a virtue. However, years later, he expressed regret for not having had more relationships during this stage of his life. His first intimate experience did not occur until he was 28, which contrasted sharply with Margaret's confidence and physical appeal. In his attempt to win Margarete over, Himmler shared books with her that reflected his own obsessions: Freemasons and the supposed Jewish world conspiracy. In a Germany plagued by economic crisis and prejudice, these ideas found an audience, and Margarete was no exception. After meeting Himmler, she sold her stake in the clinic where she worked, justifying her decision with the phrase, "A Jew always remains a Jew," referring to her former business partner. Although shy, Himmler was persistent in his advances. He sent her romantic letters, signing them with a peculiar nickname, "Your Landsknecht," a term referring to German mercenaries of old, lonely, heroic, yet ruthless. Margarete replied with words filled with hope, "We have to be happy." However, their relationship seemed to be built more on affection than passion. A disapproved union, Margarete, 7 years older than Himmler, was never accepted by his family. The Himmlers were devout Catholics, and she, a divorced Protestant from Prussia, did not fit their rigid social standards. Additionally, her nervous personality and awkwardness in social events fueled their prejudices. Himmler's mother even wondered whether Margarete would damage the family's reputation. Despite family disapproval, the couple married on July 3, 1928, in Berlin-Schöneberg, without any Himmler family members in attendance. A little over a year later, on August 8, 1929, their daughter Gudrun was born. With blue eyes and an angelic appearance, Gudrun, affectionately called Puppy, became the center of her father's attention. Himmler, fascinated by Germanic literature, likely chose the name Gudrun as a tribute to the Saga of Gudrun, a story glorifying the virtues of the Nordic woman, idealized as worthy of male sacrifice. A family strained by absence. After Gudrun's birth, Margarete could no longer have children, leading the couple to adopt a boy, the son of a deceased SS soldier. However, the child never found warmth in his new family. Margarete described him in her diary as a liar, a thief, and of criminal nature. Soon after, they sent him to boarding school and later to a Napola, institutions meant to train the Reich's elite. Meanwhile, Gudrun met all expectations. Margareta, describing her daughter as affectionate and gentle, frequently wrote in her diary about how marvelous her puppy was. However, family life was far from idyllic. In 1928, after studying agronomy at the University of Munich, Himmler invested Margaret's dowry in a chicken farm in Waltrudering on the outskirts of Munich. Both Himmler and Margaret had romanticized the idea of rural life, but reality proved disappointing. The chickens barely laid eggs, the chicks frequently died, and the farm soon fell into financial ruin. The burden of managing the failing farm fell entirely on Margareta, who also spent most of her time alone with Gudrun. Meanwhile, Himmler, obsessed with his political ambitions, was constantly absent. This isolation and financial difficulty took a toll on Margaret, who became irritable and aggressive. From domestic struggles to political power, in 1933, after selling the farm, the family moved to central Munich. By then, Himmler had already ascended within the Nazi Party. Once seen by his colleagues as a good man but probably inconsistent, he had now risen to control the Reich's police apparatus. In 1936, he was appointed chief of the German police, consolidating his power as Reichsführer SS. Described by Albert Speer as a schoolteacher mixed with a madman harboring bizarre ideas, Himmler used his obsession with racial purity as a way to compensate for his insecurities. That same year, the family moved to Tegernsee in Upper Bavaria, where Himmler had bought a house in 1934. However, his responsibilities within the party only grew, and his presence at home became increasingly rare, leaving Margaret and Gudrun alone in a household where the father figure was now just a distant shadow. The shift in Himmler's views on monogamy. As his life progressed, Himmler radically changed his stance on sexuality, marking a stark contrast with his once strict views on abstinence. Although he acknowledged that Margareta was not at fault for not giving him more children, he refused to accept the limitations of monogamy. Margaret Himmler, the shadow of the Reichsführer. For Himmler, monogamy was an invention of the Catholic Church, a work of Satan that needed to be abolished. He justified his beliefs with an idealized vision of Germanic prehistory, in which a nobleman could have multiple wives to ensure his lineage. Himmler extended these ideas within the SS, allowing officers with marital issues to divorce or even cohabit with a second wife. He believed that a man should not be limited to a single partner for life and saw polygamy as both a personal and collective solution. The influence of Nazi leaders on Himmler's views. Some Nazi leaders shared these beliefs. For example, Joseph Goebbels had an agreement with his wife allowing extramarital affairs. Martin Bormann promoted a lifestyle where his wife accepted his mistresses and raised all their children together under one roof. The Lebensborn program and Himmler's social engineering. In this context, Himmler created broader projects such as the Lebensborn program, founded in 1847-1936. These centers were designed to encourage childbirth among Aryan women, offering a safe place for single mothers while keeping their maternity a secret. These initiatives aimed to counteract the low birth rate that concerned the regime. Himmler even considered legalizing and encouraging births outside of marriage. At the same time, he sought to combat homosexuality, organizing social gatherings for teenagers to promote heterosexual attraction at an early age. During a 1937 speech, he stated that adolescents should have the opportunity to fall in love through activities like dance classes, as this would ensure their normal development. Himmler as a devoted father. Despite his brutality, despite his liberal views on sexuality and his growing political responsibilities, Himmler remained a devoted father. Although he separated from Margareta in 1940, he never officially divorced her, partly out of respect, but mostly to preserve his bond with his beloved daughter, Gudrun. Himmler maintained constant communication with Gudrun, whom he affectionately called Puppy. The blonde, angelic-faced child embodied the Aryan ideal and was her father's pride. Despite his numerous travels, Himmler made efforts to be present in his daughter's life, sending her photos, letters, and calling her frequently. Even within his busy schedule, he recorded every phone conversation with his family, reflecting a paternal dedication that starkly contrasted with his role in the horrors of the Nazi regime. Himmler's downfall and Margareta's isolation. When Heinrich Himmler was captured in 1945, he firmly declared, "My name is Heinrich Himmler." Shortly after, he died suddenly while in British custody. Although medical personnel attempted to assist him, they could not save him, thus ended the life of one of the most feared men of the Third Reich. Margarete Himmler, from power to anonymity. For Margarete Himmler, May 1945 marked a dramatic turning point. Until that moment, she had been the wife of one of Nazi Germany's most powerful figures, protected by status and privilege. However, with the fall of the regime, her world crumbled. On July 13, 1945, Margaret gave an interview to Anne Stringer, a journalist from United Press. She admitted knowing about her husband's role as Gestapo chief and expressed pride in him. She also declared that in Germany, a wife would never be questioned about her husband's actions. When asked about the recent events and Himmler's death, Margaret reacted with an unsettling coldness. She merely crossed her hands and shrugged, showing an indifference that shocked the journalist. Stringer described her as a cold woman, almost devoid of emotion, incapable of showing any impact from the collapse of the Nazi regime or the loss of her husband. For Margaret, the world she had known had fallen apart, yet her words and demeanor suggested a complete detachment from the human and political consequences of that moment. Detention, fear, and survival. After the war, until November 1946, Margarete Himmler and Gudrun were held in Camp 77 for women in Ludwigsburg as part of the denazification process. When the camp commander offered her release, Margarete refused to leave. She had no money, feared being lynched, and had nowhere to go. Eventually, a pastor named Bodelschwing took them in at a Protestant convent hospice where they were registered as mentally unstable individuals to avoid detection. During their stay, the nuns tried to bond with Gudrun, but the child remained distant and unwavering in her beliefs. She repeatedly declared, "I want to remain like my father." Despite Himmler having abandoned the church in adulthood, he prayed with his daughter every night, a habit that left a lasting impression on Gudrun. The nuns observed that the girl never displayed any emotion, no tears, no laughter. Both Margaret and Gudrun remained at the convent until 1952, when they finally left to start a new chapter in their lives. Margaret's struggles in post-war Germany. Margaret faced immense challenges reintegrating into post-war German society. She survived on a small pension and financial support from former SS comrades. She kept a low public profile, making no major appearances, nor offering staunch defenses of the Nazi era. However, she never expressed regret for her actions or those of her husband. Historical debate. How much did Margaret know? Historians continue to debate the extent of Margaret's knowledge and culpability regarding Nazi crimes. For example, Peter Longerich suggests she likely did not know the official secrets of Heinrich Himmler, but she was undoubtedly a fervent nationalist and anti-Semite. Jürgen Matthäus agrees, adding that she benefited economically from her husband's work. The final years of Margarete Himmler. Margarete Himmler died in Munich on August 25, 1967, at 73 years old. She spent her final years attempting to remain anonymous, suffering from heart disease and diabetes. Her legacy remains one of silent complicity, a woman who embraced the ideology of the Reich, yet tried to fade into the background as history condemned its leaders. Henriette von Schirach, the wife of the Reich's guardian. The fate of Baldur von Schirach's wife is, without a doubt, a unique case. Although she never condemned Hitler or Nazi policies, Henriette von Schirach is remembered as one of the few women who openly confronted the Führer. A childhood in Hitler's inner circle, Henriette was born on February 3, 1913, as Henriette Hoffmann. She was the daughter of Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer, which meant she knew the Führer from an early age and grew up within the inner circle of Nazi leaders. Her home became a meeting point for members of the Nazi Party, and Hitler was a frequent visitor. A marriage at the heart of the Nazi regime. In 1932, at just 19 years old, Henriette married Baldur von Schirach, a promising Nazi official who was climbing the ranks of the regime. The Führer himself served as a witness to their wedding, which took place in one of his private apartments. This cemented the von Schirach couple's status as one of the exemplary families of the Nazi elite. They had 4 children, 3 daughters and a son, and lived a life of wealth, influence, and luxury. Henriette briefly worked as Hitler's secretary, while Baldur held key positions in the Nazi regime, first as Reich youth leader, Reichsjugendführer, and later as Gauleiter, regional leader in Vienna. The confrontation with Hitler. However, in 1943, a pivotal moment changed Henriette's life forever. While in Amsterdam, she witnessed the brutal deportation of Jews. Shaken by what she saw, she decided to confront Hitler himself, believing that her long-standing relationship with him would allow her to persuade him to stop the violence. Her confidence was misplaced. During a meeting at Hitler's vacation residence in Berghof, she pleaded with him to show mercy. Hitler reacted with fury. "That is the last thing I need? To have you come to me with such sentimental nonsense? Why do you care about these Jewish women?" Immediately after this explosive exchange, Hitler expelled the von Schirachs from his inner circle, cutting all ties with them. From that moment on, her family's privileged position within the Reich was lost. The aftermath: interrogation and divorce. After the fall of the Third Reich, Henrietta and her husband were interrogated during the Nuremberg trials. Baldur von Schirach was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity and sent to Spandau prison. While her husband served his sentence, Henriette faced the fate common to many Nazi wives after the war. Her wealth was gone. Her properties were confiscated. Her family name became a symbol of a criminal regime. For a time, she was held in a prisoner camp where she was forced to clean toilets using banners of the Hitler Youth, the organization her husband had once led. Unlike many Nazi wives, Henriette did not remain loyal to her husband. She divorced Baldur von Schirach in 1949, while he was still imprisoned, and later remarried. Legal battles and attempts at rehabilitation. Despite her separation from the Nazi elite, Henriette fought legal battles to reclaim certain assets, particularly artworks confiscated after the war. She managed to recover some pieces from the Bavarian state painting collections, even though many of them had been looted from deported Jewish families. In 1958, she traveled to London to meet with British Foreign Minister Selwyn Lloyd. Her goal was to request a reduction in Baldur's sentence, claiming that he was by no means a criminal, but rather an idealist who was too good for politics. Her plea was denied. A writer and defender of the Nazi legacy, Henriette spent her later years writing books, sharing her memories of the Nazi era. She published 3 works, which were met with widespread criticism. 1. The Price of Glory, 1956. 2. Anecdotes about Hitler, 1980. 3. Women Around Hitler, 1983. In her books, she depicted Hitler as a warm-hearted Austrian, a description that sparked outrage among historians and the public. Unrepentant, until the end, Henriette von Schirach died on January 18, 1992, having never condemned Hitler, her husband, or the Nazi ideology. She remains a controversial figure, remembered not for her opposition to Hitler, but rather for her unwillingness to acknowledge the crimes of the regime. Ilse Hess, the wife of the Nazi ideologue. Ilse Hess was a devoted wife, unwavering in her support for her husband even in the most difficult times. A staunch defender of National Socialism, she was born Ilse Pröhl in Hanover in 1900. Raised in a conservative nationalist family, her political views were shaped early on, significantly influencing her future. Meeting Rudolf Hess and their rise in the Nazi Party, Ilse met Rudolf Hess in 1920, while studying economics at the University of Munich. They quickly bonded over their shared ideology and soon began a romantic relationship. Both became early members of the Nazi Party, integrating into Hitler's inner circle from the start. By late 1927, they were married in a ceremony that was both a political and ideological statement. As Rudolf Hess's influence within the Nazi movement grew, Ilse enjoyed the privileges that came with her husband's rising status. The height of power. When Hitler rose to power, Hess was rewarded for his unwavering loyalty. In 1933, he was appointed Deputy Führer, becoming Hitler's closest confidant until 1941. During this time, the Hess family lived in luxury in Munich, surrounded by other high-ranking Nazi officials and their families. They frequently hosted private gatherings with Nazi leaders. In 1937, Ilse gave birth to their son Wolf Rudiger Hess, whose godfather was Adolf Hitler himself. A quiet presence among Nazi wives. Despite her proximity to power, Ilse Hess did not seek the spotlight. Unlike Magda Goebbels or Emmy Goering, who competed for influence within the Nazi elite, Ilse preferred a lower profile. However, this changed dramatically in 1941 when Rudolf Hess was declared a traitor. Betrayal and isolation. In May 1941, Hess secretly flew to the United Kingdom on an unauthorized mission to negotiate peace with the British. The British arrested him immediately, and Hitler, enraged, expelled him from the Nazi Party. With her husband imprisoned and disgraced, Ilse was left completely alone, forced to defend his reputation within Nazi circles. Post-war struggles and defending Rudolf Hess. After the fall of the Third Reich, Rudolf Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment at the Nuremberg trials. Meanwhile, Ilse lost all her wealth and privileges, but she never wavered in her support for her husband. She launched a relentless campaign for his release, pleading with former Nazi associates, world leaders, post-war German politicians. However, her efforts were in vain. Ilse was arrested and detained in the Augsburg-Göggingen internment camp, though she was released in March 1948. Despite her own hardships, she continued to publicly defend her husband and the Nazi cause. A voice of the neo-Nazi movement, Ilse Hess never repented for the crimes of the Nazi regime. Instead, she became a leading figure in neo-Nazi circles, using her writings to preserve and glorify Hitler's ideology. She authored at least 4 books, including England, Nuremberg, Spandau, Ein Schicksal in Briefen, published by the nationalist Droffel Verlag. All of her books praised Hitler and defended the National Socialist movement. The death of Rudolf Hess and Ilse's final years. Rudolf Hess never completed his life sentence. In 1987, after decades of solitary confinement in Spandau prison, he took his own life. Ilse Hess died 8 years later, in 1995, at the age of 95. Until her last breath, she remained committed to preserving the memory of her husband, never expressing regret for the Nazi regime or its crimes. Margarete Speer, the woman behind the architect of the Third Reich. Margarete Speer, born Margarete Weber on September 8, 1905 in Heidelberg, was the wife of one of the most prominent figures in Nazi Germany, Albert Speer, the architect of the Third Reich and the minister responsible for armament production during World War II. Early life and marriage to Albert Speer. Margarete grew up as the daughter of a successful craftsman, and although she came from a humble background, she caught the eye of Albert Speer in 1922. However, Albert's family rejected her, believing that her social standing was too low for him. Despite this, Margarete and Albert married in 1928, even though a significant portion of Albert's family did not attend the wedding. She did not visit her in-laws' home for a long time after their marriage. Together, they had 6 children. However, their relationship was far from ideal, largely because Albert was consumed by his career within the Nazi Party, focusing on his role as Hitler's chief architect and his close relationship with the Führer. Life as a wife and mother during the Nazi era. While Albert was rising to prominence, Margarete tried to remain out of the political spotlight, focusing on raising their children and fulfilling her role as a model Nazi wife. She largely stayed out of the public eye during the early years of the war. However, as Albert's influence grew, particularly his involvement in weapon production during the war, Margarete became aware of his role in the Nazi war machine and the crimes committed by the regime. Despite this, she continued to stand by her husband, and like other wives of Nazi officials, her life was upended in 1945 when the Third Reich collapsed. Post-war struggles and support for Albert. After the war, Margarete Speer was interrogated during the Nuremberg trials, where Albert was portrayed as one of the few high-ranking Nazis who showed genuine remorse for his actions and his support of Hitler. Albert began constructing his good Nazi myth, claiming ignorance of the crimes committed by the regime and arguing that he was merely fulfilling his duties within the Nazi framework. Margarete stood by him, showing unwavering loyalty, even during the 20 years he spent imprisoned in Spandau prison. During this time, she lost all her wealth and possessions and was forced to raise their 6 children on her own, though she received some help from former party members. The aftermath of Albert's imprisonment. When Albert was released from prison, he couldn't repair his relationship with his children, and his bond with Margaret also remained strained. Albert continued to build his public image as a remorseful former Nazi, seeking opportunities to defend his actions. He appeared in interviews, participated in public programs, and traveled widely, trying to maintain his version of events. In 1981, Albert suffered a stroke in London while preparing for a TV appearance. He died on September 1st that same year, never reconciling with his family. While he was married to Margaret, he had also formed a relationship with a woman in London during the years of his imprisonment. Margaret's later years. Margaret lived a quiet life after Albert's death, maintaining a low public profile. She continued to defend her husband's actions and remained loyal to him, even as the world around her changed. She passed away in 1987 at the age of 82 and was buried in the Speer family grave in Heidelberg. Throughout her life, Margareta never renounced her support for Albert even after his death, and continued to stand by him as one of the good Nazis of the post-war era. Anneliese von Ribbentrop, the wife of the Nazi diplomat, wife of Joachim von Ribbentrop, Minister of Foreign Affairs during the Nazi regime between 1938 and 1945, Anna Elisabeth Henkel was born in Baden-Baden on January 21, 1896. Of aristocratic origin, her family was a producer of champagne, a business with which they had accumulated a great fortune. Her father, Otto Henkel, was the owner of Henkel & Company. Sekt-Kellerei, so Anna grew up in an environment of luxury and surrounded by influential people. It was in this context that she met Joachim while they were playing a tennis match. He already held a military rank as a first lieutenant and had been part of a mission in Constantinople. They married on July 5, 1920 in Wiesbaden. They quickly started a family. They moved to a house in Berlin-Dahlem and had 5 children. This residence became a meeting place for Nazi politicians starting in 1932, when Joachim joined the party. He had personally met Adolf Hitler and was fascinated by his speech and oratory. In May of that year, he officially joined the NSDAP, and Anneliese chose to do the same shortly afterward. Joachim played an important role in the definitive rise to power of the Führer. He used his influence to mediate the relationship between Chancellor Franz von Papen and Hitler in 1931 and 1932, following the Reichstag elections. This was the key moment in the transformation of the Weimar Republic into the Third Reich. To this end, the secret talks facilitated by the von Ribbentrop family were central, something Hitler later thanked him for by granting him the position of diplomat and later Minister of Foreign Affairs in his government. Meanwhile, Anneliese enjoyed the benefits derived from this: wealth, an influential social position, luxuries and comforts. She accompanied her husband on numerous trips abroad and acted as a hostess to Nazi officials and diplomats in their home. She also shared the ideology and actions of the party. Joachim von Ribbentrop's role was so important that the Nuremberg judges sentenced him to death in 1946. During the year he was imprisoned, she frequently visited him and testified in his defense. After his execution on October 16th, Anneliese found herself in the same vulnerable position as other wives. With no money, socially ostracized, and her property confiscated, she faced great difficulties reintegrating into post-war Germany, as her surname was now linked to Nazi crimes. Initially, she tried to flee to Rhineland, but she was quickly captured and imprisoned in the Dachau internment camp. She took on the task of disseminating her husband's writings and published a book on the causes of World War II. Although she did not publicly defend the actions of Joachim or Hitler, she remained loyal to them during the trial, but afterward tried to remain anonymous to protect her children. As she came from a wealthy family, she was able to recover some of her inheritance, which allowed her to live more comfortably than other former Nazi wives. She passed away on October 5, 1973, at the age of 77, bearing the weight of being the widow of a war criminal, though without showing regret for her ideas. Gerda Bormann, the loyal wife of Hitler's confidant. Gerda Buch, wife of one of the most influential Nazi leaders and personal secretary to Adolf Hitler, went from being the exemplary mother of the regime to meeting a tragic fate in the post-war years. She was born in the city of Constance on October 23, 1909. Her father, Walter Buck, had been a member of the Nazi Party since the 1920s, so Gerda grew up under the direct influence of its ideals. Bormann met her when she was very young during meetings with her father, who held the position of head of the Commission for Investigation and Reconciliation, an entity responsible for reconciling internal disputes within the party. Because of this, visits by high-ranking Nazis were frequent in their home, including visits by Hitler himself. When Gerda was 19, she and Martin married, with Hitler and Rudolf Hess as godparents. They had 10 children over the following 12 years, which perfectly aligned with the Nazi ideals of producing Aryan German children and the role of women in the regime as mothers. But it wasn't just that. Gerda was a recognized enthusiast of the Nazi ideology. Not only did she support her husband, but she also openly shared in his vision for the country and the actions to carry it out. So much so that she chose to tolerate the extramarital affair that Martin had with actress Manja Behrens. Additionally, one of her projects was to create a Nordic reproductive community that would follow the parameters of Nazi ideology and the Aryan race. After Hitler's rise to power, Martin Bormann became chief of staff in Rudolf Hess's office. When Hess was expelled from the party in 1941, Bormann became Hitler's personal secretary until the fall of the regime. Meanwhile, Gerda enjoyed a life of luxury and comfort in Oversalzberg. When the war ended, Martin Bormann disappeared, and Gerda found herself in a difficult position, being marked as the wife of one of the most wanted Nazi criminals. She was sent to several detention centers while losing all her money and societal influence. Although she was released in 1946, she could not bear the challenges of reintegrating into society and the burden of her husband's crimes. She moved to Italy and attempted to fight poverty and social exclusion while caring for all her children. However, she contracted cancer and passed away on March 23, 1946, in the city of Merano, leaving her 10 children orphaned. The wives of Nazi leaders had diverse fates, but they carried similar responsibilities and guilt, being the companions of war criminals, which earned them social condemnation in post-war Germany, regardless of the level of knowledge they had about their husbands' actions. They went from luxury to poverty in an instant and had to face the decision of either regretting their past or intervening for the release of their husbands. Some chose the latter option, showing an unwavering conviction in Nazi ideas, while others tried to rebuild their lives in anonymity. Lena Heydrich, the woman behind the Butcher of Prague. Another of the main wives of the Nazis was Lena Heydrich, spouse of Reinhard Heydrich, head of the Reich Security Office, as well as the leader of the occupation in the territories of Bohemia and Moravia. Lena was born on June 14, 1911, on the island of Fehmarn, into an aristocratic family, although in decline, of Prussian origin, with a military lineage and nationalist ideas. Because of all this, combined with the economic crisis of the Weimar Republic, it was easy for Lena to identify with the ideas promoted by the emerging National Socialism. Even her brother Hans was a member of the SA. In 1929, Lena attended a Nazi party meeting and witnessed a speech by Adolf Hitler that sparked an unwavering devotion to him. The following year, she met Reinhard during a party at a rowing club, as he already held a position as a naval officer. They quickly fell in love and married in 1931, but Reinhard had previously been engaged to the daughter of a senior officer, so his actions were considered dishonorable and immoral, forcing him to resign. Lena and Reinhard fell madly in love. The first gift she gave him was a copy of Mein Kampf, which he apparently never read. He was only interested in his career, and although he shared her conservative ideas, he was not politically inclined. After being dismissed from the Navy for an honor-related offense, Heydrich was unemployed. Although he was given a salary of 200 marks for 2 years due to his background, finding a job in Depression-era Germany with such a stigma was no easy task, and marrying without resources was even harder. Her future in-laws insisted she leave him, but she refused. The intelligent young woman was resourceful and moved heaven and earth to help her fiancé, aware of his extraordinary talents. She decided to guide him down an unknown path with great potential, the National Socialist Party. Following her advice, which she would continue to offer as a guide in those early years, Heydrich joined the National Socialist Party through a family friend, Karl von Eberstein. At that time, he was just a newcomer with no political pedigree. Upon learning that the Reichsführer was seeking candidates to organize the intelligence service of the SS, Eberstein proposed his friend, claiming that he had been an intelligence officer in the Navy. This was an error that no one noticed. He had only taken a radio transmission course but knew nothing about intelligence. The similarity between the two terms led to the misunderstanding. Heydrich was invited to the residence of Heinrich Himmler in Waldtrudering, near Munich, the capital of the Nazi movement, on June 14, 1931. Although Himmler had the flu and cancelled the meeting at the last moment, Lena, sensing that the great opportunity might slip away, decided they should go anyway, and they took the train. Although they were received with reluctance, the interview took place. Seeing that his interviewer knew less than he did about security, Reinhard made a suggestive diagram with almost professional language learned from spy novels, which impressed the former chicken breeder. A few days later, with Hitler's approval, Heydrich was appointed head of the SD. Aware of the great step they had taken and the importance of her involvement, Mrs. Heydrich later stated, "This was the most glorious day of my life, of our lives." The salary was not excessive, but it was enough to live on, albeit austerely, so the couple decided to marry. The wedding took place on December 26, 1931, in the small church of Grossenbrode, Schleswig-Holstein. Heydrich appeared in a tailcoat and top hat, not in the SS uniform everyone expected, as Lena explained. "My husband didn't like the uniform. He wore it out of obligation. He preferred to dress as a civilian when not on duty." The early times were far from easy. They lived on the first floor of a shared house in the Munich neighborhood of Lochhausen, which frequently became an office. Soon, their first children arrived, Klaus and Heide. The SD chief was a natural worker with no fixed hours, although he tried to reserve some time for his children. As he accumulated more positions, the formerly apolitical Heydrich underwent a radical transformation, in which his wife's influence seemed absent. Not only did he abandon the Catholic Church, but he embraced the racial and ideological tenets of National Socialism with the zeal of a convert. In all things, Judaism appeared as the black beast to be defeated. But as the years passed and he continued rising in the Nazi hierarchy, the couple grew distant. Heydrich had less and less time for his wife, and he reportedly was unfaithful. Although this has never been confirmed, it is said that he decided to pay her back in kind and flirted with the ambitious, handsome SS Hauptsturmführer Walter Schellenberg. However, the always well-informed Heydrich cut that relationship off at once, threats included, and reconciled with his wife, leading to the birth of their third child, Silke, for whom he would develop a strong affection. From then on, and at least outwardly, their relationship seemed to improve, and Lena enjoyed the luxury befitting the wife of the second highest officer in the SS, after Himmler, with whom she did not get along. With National Socialism in absolute power, Heydrich was appointed deputy to Heinrich Himmler in Bavaria, where they carried out a fierce persecution of Jews, opponents, and other groups considered enemies of the Reich. He played a central role in the Kristallnacht pogroms of November 1938. Meanwhile, Lena not only supported her husband's actions, but also encouraged him to be even tougher and more loyal to the party. The marriage had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and they behaved as an exemplary couple, despite Reinhard's infidelities. Due to his distinguished actions, in 1941 he was appointed Deputy Protector of Bohemia and Moravia in present-day Czech Republic, where the couple acted as a viceroyal pair. Hitler gave them a mansion to live in Prague, surrounded by luxury and comfort, while they imposed a brutal persecution of opponents and installed their regime in the city. Reinhard earned the nickname of the Butcher of Prague. But everything changed on May 27, 1942. Reinhard, overly confident, was traveling in an open Mercedes with minimal protection when a grenade thrown by a Prague resistance group hit him, severely injuring him. Lena immediately traveled to be with him, and he passed away a week later from the infection of his wounds. The funeral became a public event, organized by Hitler as recognition of Reinhard's loyalty. He personally awarded Lena the German Order and gifted her the castle the couple was already occupying in Prague, known as Panenské Brezany Castle. As a widow, Lena planted various types of vegetables on the land, hiring Jewish forced laborers whom she would harass, whip, and mistreat. She never stopped supporting Nazi policies or the party's ideals, even after its collapse in 1945, when she was interrogated and imprisoned for 3 years. In 1948, she was released, but without the castle, luxury, or money. She had to exile herself to the German island where she was born, as the Czechoslovak government wanted to sentence her to life imprisonment. Although she tried to maintain a low public profile, she continued to support Nazi ideals and never expressed regret for the party's actions. In the 1950s, she even opened a guest house called Imbria Barba, with a false facade that concealed clandestine meetings of former Nazis and neo-Nazis. She remarried in 1965 to the Finnish theatre director Mauno Manninen and was able to reclaim a family mansion in Fehmarn, which she also turned into a National Socialist bunker. However, in 1969, other harsh events struck her life. Her new husband died, and the mansion burned down, leaving her new projects buried. The last significant action of Lena's life was the publication of her memoirs in 1976 titled Living with a War Criminal, where she defended her husband and the regime, though she claimed to be unaware of the final solution policies. Lena passed away on August 14, 1985, without ever condemning the party's ideals. In an interview, she remarked, "National Socialism was a faith and I can never renounce it." Emmy Goering, the First Lady of the Third Reich. Emmy was, for various reasons, the ideal Nazi wife according to the party's standards and needs. For this reason, she was part of the trio that contended for the unofficial title of First Lady of the Third Reich for years, alongside Magda Goebbels and Eva Braun, Emma Johanna Henny. Emmy Sonnemann was born in 1893 in the city of Hamburg into a family of good economic standing, owners of a chocolate factory. Thanks to her talent and her tall, corpulent figure, she embarked on a successful career as an actress. From the age of 20, she worked in numerous silent films and theatre plays, where she built considerable prestige. In 1916, she married actor Karl Köstlin, but they divorced a decade later, when Emmy's life took a dramatic turn. She met Hermann Goering, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Nazi Germany's Air Force, and a prominent figure in the party. As leader of the Reichstag, German parliament, he bestowed the title of Prussian state actress on Emmy in 1934. The following year, they married in a grand public event. Adolf Hitler himself served as the wedding godfather, with combat planes flying overhead and a regiment of 30,000 soldiers marching from the wedding venue to the Reich Chancellery. The British ambassador present at the ceremony commented, "Anyone visiting Germany these days will have the impression that the monarchy has been restored." As the wife of a senior regime official, Emmy was exemplary. She fervently supported the actions of her husband and the Führer, organized parties and events in their home for the party's leadership, and in 1938 gave birth to their only daughter, Edda. Hermann Goering stated that the role of German women under National Socialism was to take a pot, a dustpan, a broom, and marry a man. Emmy fulfilled this perfectly, never hesitating to support Hitler's actions. She even hosted important international political figures at the mansion she shared with her husband, including the Duke of Windsor, Charles Lindbergh, Prince Paul of Yugoslavia, Crown Prince Gustav Adolf of Sweden, and King George of Greece. Her prominent role sparked envy in other women who vied for the title of the exemplary Nazi wife, such as Joseph Goebbels' wife and Eva Braun herself. Hitler had to intervene in the dispute with Eva Braun, asking Emmy to treat her with respect, otherwise they would no longer be allowed at Berghof. The Goering couple enjoyed great luxury during the time the Nazis ruled, including the theft of a valuable collection of art from deported Jewish families. Everything changed in 1946, when Hermann committed suicide by ingesting cyanide while awaiting execution during the Nuremberg trials. Emmy was imprisoned in various Allied detention centers, along with her daughter Edda, where they endured harassment from the guards. After being freed, they had to rebuild their lives without luxuries or money, as all their possessions had been confiscated, including a collection of paintings valued at $3.6 billion in today's money. She had also owned the largest wardrobe in Europe, of which she only retained 2 dresses. In 1947, a denazification tribunal sentenced her to forced labor for supporting and belonging to the Nazi Party. However, she managed to secure a small apartment in Munich, where she lived for the following years, facing public ostracism and difficulty reintegrating into German society. While her media appearances were rare, she never showed regret and continued defending her husband until his death. In a 1951 interview, she claimed that she had been apolitical during the Nazi regime and insisted that Hermann had always had good intentions. In 1967, she published a book with a clearer defense of her ex-husband, An der Seite meines Mannes, translated as Göring, my husband. There she elaborated on her argument that she had not been involved in politics and portrayed Hermann as a good spouse and father. She also suggested that the country's fate would have been better if her husband had gained power instead of Hitler, whom she considered mentally unstable. Emmy passed away on June 8, 1973, at the age of 80, not as a staunch advocate of post-war Nazism, but without ever showing regret for her actions or those of her husband. Magda Goebbels, the tragic First Lady of the Third Reich. While Eva Braun was with the Führer for 13 years, she never had the public projection that Magda Goebbels did. Magda became the true, unofficial First Lady of National Socialism. Born on November 11, 1901 in Berlin, Magda was the illegitimate daughter of August Bernd, a maid and likely engineer Oskar Rischel, who married her mother later but did not give the child his surname. After divorcing Günter Quandt in 1929, Magda began frequenting the Nordic Club, an institution founded in 1909 that promoted Nordic superiority and was openly sympathetic to National Socialist ideology by that time. Her bond with Nazism likely deepened when she attended a speech by Joseph Goebbels at a rally in the Palast der Reich. Soon after, she joined the Nazi Party. Her social circle embraced her, and she became deeply involved from the outset. In 1930, she was appointed Goebbels' secretary. According to his diaries and contemporary testimonies, they fell in love at first sight. If Magda's adoration for Joseph Goebbels was blind, when she met Adolf Hitler, her enthusiasm knew no bounds. Both forged a profound relationship, and Magda became part of Hitler's small but exclusive group of female friends. Hitler remarked, "This woman could play an important role in my life, even if I don't marry her. She could be the female counterpart to my male instincts." In December 1931, less than a year and a half after the rally at the Palast der Reich, Magda succumbed to the pleas of her Nazi lover and married him. The wedding was held, curiously, on a property owned by the Quandt family in Severin. But the intriguing divorcee was not pursuing Goebbels, but Hitler, for whom she had an admiration bordering on delirium. The Führer even acted as the best man at their wedding on December 19, 1931. Magda entered the inner circle of the Nazi leader, and her relationship with Hitler became the platonic complement to the one she had with Goebbels. The three formed a trio in which Magda played the role of the Führer's muse and consort to his second-in-command. After their marriage, the Goebbels moved to an exclusive mansion located at Reichskanzlerplatz, which would eventually become the center of parties and gatherings of the Berlin bourgeoisie and the operational nucleus of the Third Reich's leader. In the following years, the couple had 6 children, all named with initials starting with H in honor of their adored leader: Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. Magda also became the first woman to receive the Cross of Honor of the German Mother, an award that made her a model for all German mothers who were to follow her example from then on. The private relationship between Magda and Hitler remains a mystery. Some claim they were formal lovers. "I also love my husband, but my love for Hitler is stronger. For him, I would be willing to leave this world," she confessed to Leni Riefenstahl on one occasion. Apart from this confession to the Reich's great filmmaker, there is no concrete evidence of a love affair, and given the influence and power Hitler had reached, it is plausible that any woman of the Third Reich could have been his lover. In the months leading up to the seizure of power, Hitler spent long periods in Berlin. As expected, the Goebbels were his hosts, opening the doors of their home in the privileged Reichskanzlerplatz. The once bourgeois and decadent socialite had transformed into the exemplary National Socialist housewife. Magda prepared lunch daily for Hitler, who had it brought to the hotel where he resided during his year as Chancellor candidate. At night, the party leadership gathered at the Goebbels mansion. The gallery of monsters that would tragically make the Third Reich infamous passed through that house. Hermann Göring, Ernst Röhm, and the ruthless Himmler, who was still at the helm of the insignificant SS, all paraded through Magda's salon, enjoying her meals and attention. Magda cooked for all of them and conversed with them. The nights at Reichskanzlerplatz often extended into the early morning hours, with the future rulers of Germany making and unmaking plans, anticipating the end of the crumbling Weimar Republic. Their predictions came true much sooner than expected. On January 30th, 1933, Hitler was tasked with forming a government. This marked the formal inauguration of Nazi Germany. The Goebbels couple was at the forefront to savor the sweet taste of victory. Joseph had been a Nazi since the early days, while Magda had only joined 3 years earlier. Both were the Führer's favorite slaves. Joseph dreamed of a Ministry of Education and Culture to enact his propagandistic delusions, but Hitler did not grant him that. Instead, he gave him something better, a candy created specifically for him, the Ministry of Information and Propaganda.